Is this on? Can you hear me all right? Yep, cool. Well, thanks so much. This talk is, I did something similar a little while ago, but it was more business focused. This is more of a developer building an API, sourcing some data from various places, good or bad, and the things that I've learned from doing that. So I'm trying to, it's a little bit of a work in progress, so if it seems to jump around a little bit, hope just bring it up in the questions and answers at the end. Who am I? Yep, Drew. I've built a whole bunch of things for big brands through media agency stuff. I've learned a lot about data ownership and who you shouldn't give data to and how you should look after data, as well as gone into the fintech thing, which is a bit of a buzzword. Huge responsibilities around financial data and financial information. So in that, I've still learned what to do by doing what not to do. In this case, paperless receipts. It was a really interesting project working with banks, merchants, retailers, payment providers, consumers, businesses, everyone pretty much. And there was a lot of questions around who owns the data. A really, really interesting place to be when you're just a small team with not much capital behind you and a big legal obligation to find out who really owns that data. But a really good exploratory learning lesson. A successful failure, but it really launched me into the next thing, which I realized the past venture was all about owning the data, which was a big mistake. Embracing the fact that you're a custodian and you're just looking after someone else's data is amazing opportunities which take a lot of risk off you, and you can have a lot more fun. So this one was a particularly interesting common ledger, which is still going. Desktop stuff as well as cloud. So it's about pulling stuff that's in the static environment that can and cannot connect to the internet sometimes. You can't, on a cloud platform, you generally have a global unique identifier. When you've got various desktop machines around the world, they don't all know about each other, and their IDs clash very, very heavily. So just those learnings around that were really, really cool. So the talk, it's a little bit about three things. Sourcing the data, so getting the data from different places, little strategies around that, things you can do, things that I've learnt. May not be best practice, but it's just the way I've been doing it. Modifying the data, so once you've got it, what you can do with it in terms of responsibilities too, because there are obligations to you when you're looking after someone else's data that they may ask you to take it out. Then delivering the data, which is what to do with giving the data away. So make sure you don't give it away to someone you don't trust. Make sure that you're still responsible for that data, but I'll get into that later. So first, sourcing the data. Screen scraping, I imagine many of you have done this. This is a pretty interesting approach because in the world of APIs, when they don't have an API, it's the one thing you kind of fall back to. Lots and lots of good libraries to do this. Lots and lots of good libraries to do bad things with this. But yeah, ultimately, it's still not your data when you grab it. This is something I'll probably iterate a bit over. Next is user-generated data. So you build a website, you build an API, someone creates some data on that, and that data is not yours. That's something that's quite hard and that people don't realize, that the person who's literally creating it, like think of an artist drawing a picture, making a song. If they put that on your platform, you don't own it. Sure, you can have licensing, you can have agreements, hey, if you put it on here, we can do this, that, and what, but it's still not yours. It's just a very general approach to it. I'm not getting into huge details because there are always exceptions to the rules, but just bring it up as an awareness thing. Commercial data, so again, you've got that data, you've paid for it, but you don't own it. So case in point, it's a really good example is operating systems. You pay for Windows, you pay for Mac OS X, you don't own it, even though you have a copy of it. So same thing for this data. You might some business subscription, you get some commercial data from somewhere, pay a paymark for some payment data. Ultimately, it's still someone else's. Non-commercial data, so royalty-free. Governments opening up their data sources, do some cool analytics, infographics and things with. Really, really cool, but you don't own that data. So the correct is you don't own the data. You do not own it unless you originally generate it. It's just something that's really key to be aware of when you're creating your own API, creating your own platform. It's something I've learned, a hard lesson, spent lots of money on it and been battered down really hard on it. And I found that even, say you've just made something cool and fun, and then it starts to become commercial. Well, when it starts becoming commercial, things like this really come up, and then people start asking these questions of you. If you are a custodian, if you just say, openly go, I don't own that, that's just data I'm looking after, your negotiations just become so much more simple. you are responsible for that data. So even though you don't own it, you are a parent, you are a custodian, you're a guardian. Chances are that you probably don't realize that when you take it on, there's those obligations, particularly around financial technology, which I've been involved with, which is the one place I really learned it. This just comes down to everything from when you're taking, say, competition forms, name, email address, everything like that. You are responsible for that data, and by God, you hear about the leaks that happen out of the weakest points, and typically you've got a big brand, who'll build lots of infrastructure, say in Air New Zealand, then they'll go outsource it to an agency. They might expose some of that customer data here, or you might be doing a campaign here. You don't get that same investment that they get given in their infrastructure to protect it. So just things to learn, and particularly around terms and conditions, by God. So this is mixing the data. So once you've got that data, this is a bit more of a developer point of view now. There's a little bit of commercial business, but this is just some ways that I've kind of learned, hey, when I've got this data, what shouldn't do with it? Well, one of the things I learned is take an original source and keep it, because first thing is you get an API. Sure, they've got their request limits and rate limiting, but every time you store it here, you don't have to re-request it every time, say, you screw up and maybe wipe your database out or open up your Elasticsearch and someone comes along and sends a delete all the indexes. That hasn't happened. And that, this is a really kind of good way, because you can start, analyzing, processing that data a lot faster. Like the talk before said, the fastest database call is to not to a database at all. Well, a fastest API call is not to an API at all. It's to your own. So here's an example of what I'll go through. So up here, there's your ID. So typically, you have your own identifier. You'll create a record, 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll get some data, whatever that is, and then as a representation, not necessarily the right data structure, is there's a source, and that's very much where the original data stayed. What's interesting is one of the applications we had with Common Ledger was one source of data may come from multiple sources, and this is great for things like price buys, price means, when you're getting data from prices from different sources. So it's just remembering the origin. That's sort of the biggest key thing here is remember the origin. Because once you've got the origin, and you've got the source data, one of the things that's really cool is also to retain the ID of the original thing. Because when you're interacting with some data, you're pulling it down, sometime in the future you might get some great commercial arrangement with these people because you're doing some great stuff with that and they're asking you to feed that data back to them. Well, when you've just taken the data and haven't really cared about how they identify their data, when they're trying to feed it back, there's a whole new challenge of, okay, well now we've got to try and do sort, merge, figure out all sorts of things. Well, instead of doing that, just one simple thing is just retain the ID. It's really simple. Most of you might be doing it already. It's just really important because later on I'll show you the reason why. From there, it's basically about tracking and tracing because once you've got that data, then you may want to change that data. It's a typical audit trail. Once you made a change, you still need to keep the originating data because technically you don't own the data. You kind of maybe want to be able to show them, hey, what you've changed, what you haven't changed. From that, again, just tag it with who did the writes, very much like a git diff, anything like that. You're just kind of tracking and tracing that sort of stuff because when someone wants to take out, say, a car that was the original color, you've painted it, whatever, it's a lease, and then they go, actually, on the lease agreement, we said, give us the blue car, which is now red. Well, you've got to know what the original color was. So here, it's all about storing a second ID. So this is the Common Ledger example. They were saying that we would have it coming in from an accounting package 1, which is origin 1. We would then write it out to another accounting package. So that's, say, someone going from 0 to an MIB. We then understand that. It's very key because now what you end up being is a translator, not just an API, but a translator because you can go, okay, I've got my ID, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got the original ID, origin 1, 4, 3, 2, 1. But actually the one with destination has also got the same ID too. And it's just keeping that prefix. So you kind of start thinking about like a composite key. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 for your data. You'll know that, you'll love it, you'll make it unique because it's your platform. But then you might have some unknown system, i.e. desktop, and that's not a global identifying number. So you then need to know the origin and the ID there, and then it's going off over here. And actually that's using the same naming convention. And it allows you that if you come in from that side, or internally, you can actually still find that data, because in the context coming from the left-hand side for origin 1, they're going to know their IDs. So let's say someone developing stuff on the original source of data wants to use your system to maybe get some extra, I don't know, cool analytics that you've built up on that data. Well, for them to have to then track your ID, their ID, and whatever else is going along, what this offers to them is the ability to go, actually, just use your original ID. Don't worry about what we create. Just use that. And so from there on, they can start, I was just building another one, from delivering it. I'll get to it. Sorry, it's a little bit mixed. But from there, it would be, you could start querying off that origin 1 ID, which I'll get to later. So that's sort of modifying it. It's kind of like you've started tracking it. You've still got the original data. You've got your modified data. You've got all the different origins of where you're getting data and you're tracking it. And again, that key point around the IDs is you've got all those IDs tracked and traced and related as well. Be it if you want to put it in some relational tables, graph database, whatever you want to do. It's just something that they can look up later. So when you're delivering it, again, look up ID. Don't be selfish. Let the others use their source IDs too. So you've sourced it from origin 1. And then, they're asking for that origin 1 ID rather than having to try and remember their relationship table of what's your ID, what's their ID. They can then query their own. So it's very much just about getting, so this is me looking up on my own database. So I know the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. I get the data, and I also get to see the originating data on the left and right-hand sides too. From here, this is the person on the left going, actually, you've got some great data, the same before. I want to get some really cool stuff that you've done with the aggregated stuff. You've done some cool merging, playing around, stuff that we can't do. And then what they've done is the ID's changed. So from 1, 2, 3, 4, it's gone to a prefix, so a bit of a composite of origin 2, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can see that that's pulled it out there. The goal there, again, is allowing them to work in the language they understand and the IDs they understand. It may or may not be the way you work, but the reality is we've got a world of all these technologies coming together, and this is a way that we can kind of work together. So the opportunity is once you've now got that data, you've done your modifications, it's all about what can I do with this? You know, how can I deliver this data to people? One of the things is anonymizing it. You know, technically, this is something that people get away with. It's usually in the T's and C's. Hey, you put something on here, we'll anonymize it, and then we can kind of give some market trends to some other people or do things around there. It's a good opportunity, and I encourage you to have it as a default opportunity to make some money if you didn't think about making money. It's kind of the knee-jerk reaction when you want to make some revenue. But the big thing I learned is when you start playing with big players is they can profile this pretty quickly. So even though there's no name, no email address, nothing like that, they can use other sources, match them together. Data mine's an example. Get it together, and they can pretty much figure out who that person was and find out the name from somewhere else. Self-regulation. Working with a lot of big players, this is what they like to do. That's where they'll share data between each other. May or may not be the right way, but the ultimate goal is let's all chat together to make sure we don't piss off any of our customers, so that when we share our data and our CRMs and whatever else, we don't annoy anyone. Is that the right thing to do? Depends who you are. The next part is because once you've got the obligation of taking that data in, you've got the data in here now, and you're playing around with it, and then you want to give it to someone because you're opening it up. You say it's just it's a hobby, you want to make something easier. Real estate listings, rental listings, car listings, trip classifieds, those sorts of things. Ultimately, when it comes in, you've sourced it, they're trusting you with that data, you're now sending it out, you're still responsible. So it comes down to when you're building like a developer portal, developer advocate, it's all about, say with MYB, they do a certification behind add-ons. And they don't do it to annoy you. They do it because ultimately they're giving you access to their customers' data. It's a big part, again, in that financial technology part, but ultimately it's still something we should really consider because you're looking after someone else and you wonder, like when you put in say a honeypot email address, drew.broadley plus honeypot@gmail.com with retailer one, and all of a sudden you get, some email through another person with the same email address. Well, this is kind of what it's all about, is these people are just not being responsible with that data. Good practice, a really good thing to do. It doesn't take a lot of effort. It's kind of like a checklist. There's Cloud Code NZ. People question whether it's good or bad, but the one that's better is the CSA star standard. It's just a disclosure to say, this is what I'm doing with the data, this is how I'm looking after the data, this is where I'm storing the data, and this is what you can do if you want your data. It just again, removes that sort of obligation of, or risk of people using your system, you not meeting the requirements, you get slapped later on, and then if you haven't followed these standards, then there's no one to protect you because these guys and girls can look after you too. So what happens when they want their data back? It's always a tricky one. What if you've already gone down, your horse is bolted, and meanwhile at the starting gate and they want you to come back to the start? Well, the idea is going back to, there's got to have some clear ownership on who added the data, where did it come from, what has it been changed? It's just one of those things that, unfortunately, that it's the ugly side of building an aggregation, that if you use someone who, for whatever reasons, it might be legal reasons, they come to you with cease and desist, said, don't do that, take it out. It's very much, you can give them just a record that, hey, this is where it is, we've removed it, things like that. If you go back to here, these things very much help you with that. But again, responsibilities of data ownership, yeah, it's and custodian. So now that data is in 3 places, who owns all that data? Sort of an open question. The answer is they do. And that's just something that still to be defined in courts of law. Lawyers aren't willing to fight the fight. You've got things where copyrights ownership on, say, uploading Facebook photos. Facebook say they own it. You've got the global copyright battles. Yeah, there's a lot of things, as I said. To go into this, to face the world of all this data out there, it's just easier and it's responsible to go into the world saying this is not my data. So an example I have, which is a really interesting fight, I got to know a guy called Greg Kidd. He made a lot of money through Twitter, through Square, now is involved in Ripple. He basically said, I love developers. I said, the other guys and girls that help me make my money, the other guys and girls that develop the Twitter infrastructure, the other guys who innovated on payments, the business guys, they do their thing, but the developers are the ones that are really changing the world. He then put a lot of money into a thing called 3Taps. 3Taps very much goes around and sources data from lots of different places. They do, classifieds, so they get eBay, Craigslist, TradeMe. They'll do a whole bunch of various other things they're branching into. What happened is, naturally, they were trying to do it for free. They're trying to give it away for free in terms of free access to this data, which is technically in the open, should be used for good, not for making money, but for doing some cool things. A map showing all the local lofts and things for rent in America, or even in New Zealand. What happened was Craigslist didn't like this. They claimed that they owned the data, and so what happened was there was a battle embroiled where Craigslist would say, no, this is not your data. So then 3Taps went, okay, that's fine. We'll argue that on the side, but we're going to go ahead and start using Google's cache because technically you've allowed Google to cache the data, so technically it is free reign data, public domain data, so we're going to start hitting Google's caches for the data instead of Craigslist. So then Google got brought in, and then Google started removing the cache for Craigslist, and so then 3Taps and Google started talking about what was going on. Meanwhile, Craigslist is upping the ante and going, well, no, Google, gone. It's all gone. I'm going to remove our data out of Google if this keeps on. So you can start seeing that's a big thing for Craigslist because Craigslist uses Google for a lot of its traction. And things just really escalated, and poor Greg was, he probably made hundreds of millions of dollars. He was spending tens of millions of dollars on this legal fight. And the fight was really so we could go out there, source some data, use it for some good things, not bad, and be able to do some stuff. That was his fight, and that's why he wanted to put so much money into it. Ultimately, the goal was, courts said, California copyright rule, which is, I won't get into the details, really bad, old legacy rule, hasn't caught up with the times, defined that, no, Craigslist owned the data. 3Taps then was liable to pay billions of dollars. It was something ridiculous, like $1.5 million per record that they took. And then, meanwhile, poor old Greg had to pack his bags and potentially fly out in a helicopter because the DIA and everything were going to come and get him. So he's a bit of a hero that you probably wouldn't have heard of, but he's really fighting our fight, and there are a lot of people out there doing that. And it's really exciting with, as you know, the world connecting together, things that are happening, the APIs you can connect to these days. The reality is that this fight is still not being fought, and it will forever be fought because there's a lot of people who are trying to make money off this or trying to do their own thing. And there's still people who aren't building APIs. So how do you get those people's data? Yeah, that's kind of pretty much the talk.